Good morning, everyone. Today I am, well, I'm unbelievably thrilled that I have connected with Dr. Tracey Shors. She is someone who I have been following her on social media for quite some time. And she's today is going to be talking to us about something which I think a lot of those people who are sick can relate to, which is trauma. And well, Dr. Tracey, can I call you that? Is that all right today? Does that
Yes,
work?
you can call me just Tracy's good.
Okay. Oh, bless you. Well, Tracey, let's just start right at the beginning. I mean, what is trauma and how do you define it in the context of what you do and what you research?
Yeah, well, trauma, importantly, is the experience. Sometimes people think of trauma as the event itself, but the trauma is really the response to the event. Um, there's many definitions of trauma. I kind of prefer to think of it as a wound. The word trauma actually came from the word wound, and I think it's a good way of thinking about how it's different than, say, stress. Stress could be good or bad. It could be disturbing, but it generally is not as, well, put it this way, trauma is usually worse than a stress. So if you have a stressful experience, you say, well, maybe I didn't like it, but I can forget it. Whereas trauma usually induces some kind of long lasting, like a wound. You remember it, you think about it all the time, or at least some of the time. You have a body response to it. So it's like a stressor, but it's more intense.
Yeah.
That's how I think of it. And with respect to everyday trauma, that's a little different because I think of that as more either you have a really bad experience, maybe a rape or a violent attack or an earthquake, some kind of acute experience. Doesn't last very long, but then you think about it, every day.
Yeah, it haunts you, doesn't it? It's something
Yeah.
that kind of you carry it with you.
You carry it with you in part because you change so many things in the brain. And, so it makes sense. You want to remember bad things to some extent so that you can avoid them in the future.
Mm.
But unfortunately, sometimes it's too long. It's too much. There's too many thoughts, too many responses. Yeah.
And can you explain how trauma impacts our physical and mental health?
Well, it affects so many different systems. Um, there's two kind of primary systems in our body that are used to respond to bad events or to experiences that are intense. One is the so-called fight or flight response. And I think most people have heard of that. It's called the sympathetic nervous system response. And so when a bad experience happens, your heart beats really fast. You start to sweat. You get lots of blood flowing to your muscles so that you can run away. In some cases, people freeze. Women in particular often freeze when they're under a lot of stress or afraid. But that system mediates that response because you need a lot of energy, to escape or to freeze or to fight. Um, and that response goes all over the body. Really release a lot of epinephrine from your adrenal glands. That goes into the brain, changes all kinds of structures and synapses and responses in the brain. Um, and then that response usually kind of dissipates. Like after the experience is over, after as the fear subsides and someone realizes, hey, I'm still alive, I'm probably not going to die. um, that response lessens. But then there's this other response. It's often referred to, well, it's a mouthful. It's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal response.
Okay.
It's shortenly called the HPA axis or HPA response. It's really basically cortisol. You're releasing cortisol also from your adrenal glands. It's a hormone, stress hormone, goes out into your blood and also goes to your brain and changes the anatomical structures in your brain and yeah, all kinds of things, responses, neural responses. But importantly, what it really does, or what it's one of its main functions, is anti-inflammatory, meaning it reduces inflammation. So if you were injured, a lot of people, when they have a back injury or something, right, they get a cortisol injection. That's because cortisol, when it's released in our body, reduces inflammation. So, that response is helpful to help us repair if we've been injured, both mentally and physically. So those two responses, they kind of act together. One is really short, kind of short lasting. The other one is more, chronic.
Yeah, and I mean those two different types of the way that the body's responding. I mean, how is the brain processing these traumatic experiences? I mean, and is that then leading to long-term effects? Are we, when something happens, are we sort of, does it absorb into us and become part of our sort of our setup, our psyche, so to speak?
Yeah, it does actually. I mean, I think that's one thing people don't appreciate maybe is how much our experience changes the structural integrity of our brain. I think sometimes people think, well, they've heard of maybe neuroplasticity and they know that the brain changes, but I think it's hard to appreciate how much our thoughts, our feelings, our memories, change the actual structure of the brain. And they're not necessarily going to last forever. We're always, because the brain is always changing. So even if you did change, a bunch of structures in the brain after a stressful experience, it doesn't mean they don't change again later when you recover or you go to therapy or do some type of intervention or even just with time. It's the brain responds to everything we do. That's how it works, really. And even our thoughts, change the structure of our brain.
And so when, I mean, I one of my kind of focus, my passion, my interest is in how people can heal themselves, but also coming back to often what causes people to get sick. Because I think if you can actually go back to where you have the root problem or challenge, by actually working to try and heal that, that's how then you can change how the body's responding to this threat. Now, is that something that you would agree with, or that you feel is the truth? Or
Yeah, I mean, definitely. One of the one of my main focuses over the last decade or so has been providing this intervention. It's called MAP Train My Brain, and it stands for MAP stands for mental and physical. And it's 30 minutes of meditation, silent sitting meditation, followed by 30 minutes of aerobic exercise. And we've been providing this intervention out in the communities, many populations, people with trauma, mostly women with trauma. And, in general, most of our studies, we recruited people who had already had a trauma, sexual violence, homelessness, addiction, depression, all kinds of symptoms. But one study we actually did during the pandemic, we had people, these were teachers, at the beginning of the pandemic, teachers were obviously super stressed out. I mean, everyone was actually in the whole world, but teachers in particular, because they didn't know if they were going to have to go back to school. They were afraid of, getting the virus at school, bringing it to their home. There was no vaccine.
of course.
Yeah, it was, as you remember, it was really, really stressful and in many cases traumatic time for people. And so we provided this intervention to teachers. Most of them were women. And we found that not only did it help the symptoms of depression and anxiety and trauma and rumination for the teachers that we provided it to, but it also prevented some of the increase that would have happened anyway. Because as the summer progressed, as it got closer and closer to the school year, the teachers who didn't do the intervention got worse. They got more and more anxious, more and more stressed, whereas the teachers who were doing the program didn't get worse.
Yeah.
So it's a really it's a really good example of kind of preparing yourself for the future. It's not just about, oh, I had a traumatic experience, or when I have a traumatic experience, I'm going to go get some help. But rather, it's like, prepare yourself now because trauma is going to happen.
Definitely.
People you love are going to die. Eventually, you're going to die. Like we don't know. There could be another pandemic. We just don't know.
Yeah. And so, I mean, this intervention sounds, and please excuse me if this comes across wrong, but remarkably simple.
I
As
know.
I mean, so we'll say all these things in life which are so complicated and challenging, but you're actually saying that by taking on this practice of meditating and then doing aerobic exercise afterwards, and we'll get into the specifics because it's not just any type of meditation, any type of
Right.
exercise. Um, those two things, are they sort of resetting the brain, or how is that working? What is the magic that's coming to pass?
Yeah. Well, I don't exactly know. I have a study I'm doing right now. We had women who had sexual violence, and all of them, most of them actually had PTSD. They had lots of symptoms, and we put them through this program, and they responded remarkably, like 40% less symptoms of PTSD. Over half of them didn't even have PTSD at the end. So it is really effective.
Hmm.
And we had them in this brain scanner too at the same before and after this training. Now, sadly, I don't have the data to tell you today.
No worries.
So I don't know the answer. Yeah, I don't really know why it works so well. It's something about the combination, because one study we did, we had women who had trauma just meditate twice a week. And then we had another group who just exercised, did aerobic exercise twice a week. We had another group who did both, one after the other, meditation followed by aerobic exercise. And then we had another group who did nothing. And the people who did the combination, did much better. They had much less trauma symptoms, less depression, less rumination. So there's something about the combination. And I think it's a little bit related to what I was mentioned earlier, this sympathetic nervous system response. Because, when people are afraid, or even when you're thinking about a bad experience, sometimes your heart starts to race, right? So your heart starts to race, you start kind of reliving what happened. That's a sympathetic nervous system. That's the fight or flight response. And so when you meditate, your heart rate is generally low. We sit in silence, no talking. And so just naturally, the heart rate is low. So I think at some level, the brain is kind of training or retraining itself to not be afraid, because these thoughts are going to come up. When you're meditating, that's kind of the point, right? Thoughts just come up that you're having. But if you're relaxed, your heart is not beating fast, then you kind of learn, hey, just because I'm thinking about this doesn't mean I have to be afraid.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then during aerobic exercise, it's kind of the opposite, right? Your heart is beating super fast. I mean, that's the point of aerobic exercise, is to get your heart rate up really fast. But you're not afraid. Hopefully you're even kind of having fun. Some of my courses or classes, we dance aerobically to music. Sometimes people run on a treadmill. It doesn't really matter how they do it, but generally they're not afraid, right? They're having generally a good experience. So I think it's like retraining your brain to associate the thoughts, good or bad, with the response in your body. And if you can dissociate that, I mean, to some extent, that's how therapy works. When if you go and have exposure therapy, which is like prolonged exposure therapy, which is the most common evidence-based therapy for trauma, what happens? You expose yourself to the memory. You talk about it, you write about it, you think about it a lot. And eventually your brain kind of learns, hey, the trauma is over. It's in the past. I don't need to be afraid. So I think, all of these therapies are attempting to do the same thing, which is dissociate the fear, and the memories and all that from the body response, the thoughts from this fear that you have in your body.
Oh yeah, so that's incredibly fascinating. So there's one part of you're sitting there, you're calm, thoughts are coming in, and you're letting them go. So the heart rate goes down, but then you're getting up and you're doing the aerobic exercise. And then, so I suppose, I mean, one thing I've got fatigue, when I do any exercise, I get the endorphins and that feeling
Mm-hmm.
of kind of happiness and sort of satisfaction, and I'm doing something constructive and helping my body heal and things. So I mean that seems a very logical combination, if slightly a juxtaposition to each other. How did you discover this pairing of these opposite things?
Yeah, this actually goes back years now. So back in the 1990s, I was working in the lab. I had a regular kind of so-called wet lab, neuroscience lab. And I was interested in memory and how memories are made in the brain. I was also worked on stress, but a lot of my studies were done in like rats, rat models of stress, and we were looking then at under the microscope to see if we could see changes in the brain with stress and trauma. And around that time, this discovery happened, which was that new neurons were discovered in the adult brain. Now, up until that point, certainly when I was in school, we learned the brain didn't make any new neurons. So you're born with as many neurons as you're ever going to have, and you better take care of them. So this was quite a, amazing discovery, to say the least. People didn't believe it at first, and it was definitely an intense time. And I happened to be working on the part of the brain where these cells are made. They're made in the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is a part of the brain we use to learn. It's also really, really responsive to stress and trauma. I mean, basically, the hippocampus responds to everything that's happening to us in this moment. I think of it as a real-time learning machine. It's just learning. Like even in this moment, if you're, listening to this podcast and you like learn this information, that's what's happening. Your hippocampus is responding to this information and encoding it, so to speak. So these neurons happen to be in this part of the brain. So we did some studies showing that they're involved in learning. So if you get rid of these new neurons, animals don't learn very well. But what was really important, I think, or interesting, was that the cells tend to die unless you learn something really difficult. So they're like kind of use it or lose it. They're being born, they're generated. But then if you learn something, excuse me, within a couple of weeks of them being born, then the cells survive. And then that was something my lab discovered. But then another lab found that you could make more of them with aerobic exercise.
Gosh.
So that's kind of how I came up with this idea, because I was thinking, well, maybe you could make more of these cells, through aerobic exercise, and then keep them alive by some type of mental training. And, we know meditation is pretty difficult to do. So that's kind of that was where the idea came from.
Amazing. And I mean, I think that if anyone listening was ever doubting exercise be a positive thing for you, now not only is it good for your body, but it's actually good for your mind.
Oh yes, totally. I'm just such a big proponent, and it's like the best medicine, really, really, aerobic exercise for the brain. It brings all this blood. You need lots of blood and oxygen for everything that the brain does. So, yeah. But then you have to pair it with learning. I mean, I think, exercise is great.
Yeah.
But if you pair it with learning, then it's like, then you get like more. You get like the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, so to speak.
And so when you say pair it with learning, can it be any learning that you pair it with? Can it be the learning of the exercise moves, or does it need to be something like, I mean, I sit on my exercise bike sometimes and I'm doing Duolingo on my phone, the
Yeah.
language app. I mean, is that going to be challenging enough, or do I need to be reading books, or what would you recommend?
I think as long as it's effortful, I like to use the word effortful learning. So as long as it's effortful for you, because everybody's different. And so as long as it requires a lot of concentration and attention, then it's going to be sufficient to change the brain. Now, whether or not it, works for mental health and all those things, I haven't tried all the different combinations, but sometimes people ask me, well, what if I play the guitar? I'm like, well, if you play the same songs every day, that's fine. And it's probably, good for you. It's relaxing. It's fun. But it'd be better if you played new songs on the guitar, like learn new songs or even a new instrument.
Exactly.
Because the point is like to really challenge yourself. That's what really changes the brain.
And so by taking on this intervention, this combination of activities, the trauma that the body is holding and that's sitting there, is it a bit like rewriting the story, or is it quietening what was there? How would you say it's working? Do you have any theories?
Yeah. Like one of the most consistent findings we have with this intervention is that people say that they ruminate less.
Mm.
And, I don't know if you know that much about ruminations, but ruminations they're like memories. They're repetitive thoughts that you have over and over and over again. They're always about yourself, so they're autobiographical. They're usually negative. People tend to ruminate about bad things that happened in the past, but they also tend to associate some of the blame or regret with them. So I like to think of them as memories laced with mood. So there are memories, but they're kind of self reflective. They're more like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. If I hadn't gone to that house, then this wouldn't have happened, and then that wouldn't have happened. And so you kind of go over what happened over and over again, wishing that it had been different. Those are kind of classic, ruminative thoughts. Women ruminate a lot, more than men, actually. And the thing about ruminations is like every time you have a ruminative thought, you basically make another memory, because you bring back that memory, so to speak, from the past, and then you associate with this moment and you make another memory. So, I kind of feel like that's one of the key reasons this intervention works so well, is that people just say they don't ruminate so much. So, if you're not ruminating, you have time to think about other things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Space for more in your life.
Yeah, you can be more present, right? Because if you're always like reflecting on the past, it's really difficult to be present with what's happening now.
Totally. And how do you balance the emotional toll of researching and working with trauma survivors with your own well-being and self-care? I mean, that must be
Yeah, it's a lot, actually. I yeah, it's hard sometimes not to take it home with you, so to speak.
Yeah.
I hear, yeah. And then even when I was writing my book, because my book is called Everyday Trauma, and even to this day, I'll meet people and I say, yeah, I wrote this book on trauma. And then they tell me the most horrific stories. I mean, even in the last week, just people I meet, like tell me really, like, I can't even believe it, some of the stories that I hear. And a lot of them were so bad, I wouldn't even include them actually in my book, because I just feel like there's a point where people don't need to hear the worst story in the world.
No.
Over and over again, and so, I mean, I haven't had a lot of trauma in my life, luckily. I mean, I have had some, obviously, but nothing like as bad as some of the stories I hear. So, yeah, it just makes me sad actually for people that have to go through these experiences.
Well, it's an incredible thing that you've stepped up to do, to be of service to so many in actually creating this course. Um, that to give back to society in that way. I mean, what advice would you give to someone who's interested in studying or working in the field of trauma research and mental health? I mean, because it,
Take a deep breath. Yeah, you have to distance yourself a little bit, but I think that's probably true for anyone, therapists and all kinds of people who work in the mental health field.
Mhm.
Um, you know, m- I'm probably a little more distant, even maybe than therapists, just because we do get more into the science of it.
Mm,
Um, I think it would be more difficult if you just worked in the trauma field and you didn't do intervention work.
absolutely.
At least I get to see the upside because I see this in people's, I can just tell in their faces
Yeah.
sometimes the difference. When they first come, it's just, whoa, it's just, I was, some years ago, we provided this intervention at this center in New Jersey. It's called the Center for Great Expectations. It's an amazing place. It's for women who have been homeless.
Gosh.
Not only were they homeless, but they were mothers. So
Oh,
they had young children or babies, or they were pregnant. Yeah. And they were homeless on the streets of New Jersey. So this friend of mine, she runs the center, and so it's this kind of like big house where they come to live for like a year. They learn how to be better mothers, because most of them didn't have particularly great family themselves. And they're reunited with their children. And, sometimes their children had been taken away from them. So then they kind of learn how to be mothers again and get a lot of therapy there. Anyway, so we provided this at the center, and it was just so gratifying really to see the change, like even just within a class. Like they would come in to the class, become troubling. They have lots of anxiety, lots of trauma, lots of depression, lots of problems, lots of symptoms. And then just within an hour, they really kind of changed their mood. They were more happy. They were talking amongst themselves, kind of laughing. I was like, wow. You know, Sometimes people think you have to do these amazing things to change your state of mind. But if you just kind of find something that you enjoy and you do it, even just within an hour or two, you can really change your mind. Now, I'm not saying one session is necessarily going to cure all these problems, but if you make it kind of part of your life, part of
absolutely.
your skill set, then yeah, there's a lot of hope.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And then one of the things that I am a proponent of is people actually taking on a self-care toolkit. They find things in their life that can support them facilitating the parasympathetic state in their body. So whether that's meditation, tapping, fasting, cold showers, anything that helps them kind of reset, get more in control. And the exercise, I think, for a lot of people is a hard one because they're often so fatigued, or they
Yeah,
so many health challenges. But as I said to someone the other day, even if it's just 5 minutes of yoga and you're just sitting there and you're breathing, or maybe you
yeah,
manage like a stretch, you put your arm up in the air and then you try not, maybe you can't even put your arms up, maybe you're rolling your shoulders back. Little bits of things that get the body moving are telling the body that it's okay to move and to facilitate the thought process. And so the more people that can actually get involved in doing these sort of things, I think would just be wonderful. So it's brilliant that you're taking it out into the field. What are your hopes and aspirations for the future of trauma research and treatment, both in your own work and in broader scientific community? I mean, it sounds like what you found is a great sort of package that people can take into their lives. Would you like to see this in schools and universities, or how do you see it going forward?
yeah, I would love that. I mean, the beauty about map training is like it doesn't really cost any money. You know, pretty much anyone can do it. As you say, there's some, people have physical ailments. I know everyone can't go running on a treadmill, or everyone can't, do aerobic dancing, but you could still get your heart rate up by moving your arms. I did one study with women who had HIV. A lot of them had a lot of body problems, like just couldn't do a lot of the exercises, and really had an even difficult time sitting in meditation. But they found ways. One woman just used her arms, like you said, to get her heart rate up, just moved her arms up kind of vigorously. So the beauty of it is, like, really anyone can do it. It doesn't cost any money. It doesn't require a lot of time. It's like 1 hour a week, or maybe 2 hours a week if you do it twice a week. So I kind of just want to get the message out.
Yeah.
So that people could do it. You could do it in schools. You could do it. I think it would be great for elderly people.
Absolutely.
It's just, the key really, I think part of it is doing it. That's not easy, right? It's kind of getting over the hump of saying, like, I'm going to do this today.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part. I think people, once they start it, they're totally into it. But like getting over that hump of, like, yes, I'm going to do this today, even though I don't want to, even though I'm tired, or I'm depressed, or I feel like just laying on the couch, just kind of training your brain to do it. And that sounds easy, but it's not. And, that's, if anything that I wrestle with now is, like, how do you motivate people, including myself, I include myself in this, to do it when you least want to.
Yes.
And I really do think that's where the brain training comes in. Like, after our classes, when I do them either in person or online, I have everybody sit afterwards and just kind of close their eyes and feel how they feel. Like, feel your body, feel your brain, kind of like how your thoughts are not like they were previously. In a way, training your brain to say, oh yeah, I really do feel better than I did even like an hour ago. And again, that sounds simple, but that's how the brain works. It has to be exposed to the information.
Totally.
Like, if it, to learn. So it learns, oh wow, yeah, I feel totally different than I did before. And then next time when you're not feeling good, you're like, oh, I could do this program.
And then, as you say, it's that thing of actually, on those dark days when you aren't feeling up to it and that you want to do it, trying to actually remind yourself and remember how good that feeling was when you did do it, and when you did get out and make the effort to actually combine it. No, that's absolutely super. And so, I mean, in your life, do you have any habits or rituals that you find particularly relaxing or rejuvenating, that you'd like to share with our listeners, things that you like to do to relax at the end of a day?
Well, I'm a big aerobic dancer. I love to dance. And so, in fact, I have I'm starting some kind of program with this friend of mine who's a professional dancer called My Dancing Brain. We'll see how that goes. Maybe I'll tell you about that later once it gets going. But so, in fact, I saw a study recently, I think this is really interesting, where they look at all the exercises and effects on mental health. And of course, it's usually good, right? Exercise is generally good for almost all cases, and studies have reported that. But one of the best is dancing. And I love that, because I think sometimes people think, oh, it's just dancing, it's kind of silly, or I don't know what they think, but they don't realize, like, it also combines aerobic activity with learning, because you're learning maybe the moves, or anyway. So I'm a big fan of that kind of exercise. I have a little more difficulty with the meditation. I mean, I have to kind of make myself do it. And then once I do it, I'm like, oh, wow, this is also really powerful too. Yeah. but so I try to do map training basically. Like I had a kind of bad day 3 or 4 days ago. Something happened in my life and I was just really not in a good state. And yeah, I was really tempted to just lay on the couch and cry or whatever, and I was like, okay, this is not good, better. And so I forced myself. I went to like a meditation class and then I went and did like a aerobic dance class and I felt so much better. Just in hours. And
Brilliant.
the thing is, I think people don't always appreciate, like you want to help yourself, of course, feel better. But when you feel better, everyone else does too.
Yeah,
Your children, your friends, who you interact with. It's it trickles down.
absolutely. Because it's one of those things where you can't be the best possible person to love and care for those people around you if you're not loving and caring for yourself. And so actually taking that step forward to take on a practice which will help your healing, your mental health and your physical health will have reverberations throughout your life and your situation. No, that's incredible. And just out of interest, I mean, with these practices, can you swap them over, or do they need to be done meditation and then exercise? Can you do the exercise and then the meditation?
Well, you could. I don't know if it would work as well. What one of my theories about this, because we never tested it, but one of my theories is that the reason why it works so well is because when you sit down to meditate, you want to be in the state that you're in,
Mm,
right? So if you're in a kind of bad state or just whatever state it is you're in, but you want to be as close to your state as you can be. And after you exercise, particularly aerobic exercise, you usually feel pretty good,
mhm.
right? You're kind of happy, maybe like have a lot of energy. So it's easy to meditate then, or
Really?
easier.
Ah,
So I kind of feel like it's better, to do it, to meditate when your mind is full of thoughts and chatter and like those kind of feelings that you have and
yeah.
thought kind of crazy thoughts. That's when you need to meditate. And I feel like if you did it after exercise, it probably wouldn't be as effective.
Mm,
I mean, people often say, well, I meditate, after yoga. At the end of yoga, there's usually that little meditation um, period. And that's fine. But I always find that really easy to meditate then because you're already kind of relaxed, your body's worn out. Um, and again, it's not that that's bad. It's just that I don't know if it's as effective
that's
for the
yeah.
symptoms like that we're trying to really lessen.
I was many years ago, I was told by someone who was a meditation sort of teacher that actually it's those times when you sit down to meditate and it's just the hardest time and you just don't want to be there and there's all too much stuff going around your head. Those are the times when it's actually really having an effect on you. And I learned TM many years ago, transcendental meditation. What they said to me was it was if you imagine like this thing of water and you had these little mines that were below the water, and as you meditated you were going down, and each time you kind of had that moment of like, oh right, this sort of awareness, you'd had a little bit where you'd had almost transcended, but you'd knocked out one of these little explosive mines that was the trauma.
Mm,
And when it
interesting.
really hard, it was because you were hitting so many mines of stuff that was underneath the water that was residing in your body. And I think for a lot of people, I must stop saying I think, it's my repetitive word in my vocabulary. Many people who've got health conditions, something has happened in their life that has maybe caused their body to feel that it's an unsafe zone and a place that they should be
Mhm.
right. And then maybe they get a virus or something stops working, or they get a disease or an illness. And actually taking on two practices which aren't involving chemicals or drugs or needing to buy this bit of kit or sign up for, well, other courses. I mean, I think your course would be great because it's a 6-week course. It's super affordable, but courses which are thousands and thousands of dollars, which they might not have the money for, is such a thing that so many people could do, isn't it? It's a really,
Yeah.
there's a word for it, accessible. That's it, accessible, um, a tool that people could take into their life and utilize on their healing journey. Wow. just absolutely wow. So
Yeah, I mean, anyone, yeah, you can manipulate it in any way you want. I mean, I kind of stuck with silent meditation. In part, that was because that's what I first learned how to do. Kind of Zen, sitting in silence. I know some people like to have guided, but I kind of wanted to make it so that anyone could do it. And if you needed guided, then you have to have someone guide you.
yeah.
So, but I also think it's better to do it in silence to the extent that, you know, you want to learn about your own thoughts during meditation, not someone else's thoughts, like someone else telling you what to think. So I think it's more powerful, at least for me personally, to really deal with my own thoughts. And, the only way to do that is to sit and listen to your brain. Like, what is your brain producing? It's funny for me, like being a neuroscientist, studying the brain for decades now. Until I started meditating, I never really listened to my own brain. It's kind of crazy, but I just never really thought about doing it. And then once I did, I was like, wow, that is really interesting, actually. If you kind of step away from the actual thoughts and
Mm.
just listen to the way the brain is just producing these thoughts one after the other. And sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're nothing.
Mm.
Sometimes if you're bored, for example, if you're like in a boring stage of your life and you just kind of sit and you're like, wow, I am really having trouble right now because I don't have enough constructive thoughts going on in my head. So
Wow.
you just realize it, and people often think of meditation as like relaxation, but it's really about learning. It's learning what your brain is doing. What is my brain doing?
Yeah. What is my brain doing? And
Yeah.
then, and actually being open to actually being aware of what it's doing, thoughts
Yeah,
that are coming up. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. And so you've got a book that's available on Amazon, is that
I
correct?
do. I have a copy right here. Many copies, obviously.
Wow,
Everyday trauma. Yeah,
great.
yeah. It's
Find that
kind of about. It's a little bit about what we've been talking about. I do talk about map training at the end, and um, yeah, I don't think it's too neuroscience-y. There's some neuroscience in it, obviously, because that's what I do, but I try to make it, as accessible as possible. And but my kind of philosophy is that people learn a little bit more about their own brain. It's your brain.
Mm.
People learn all kinds of things in the world, but it's your brain. It makes you who you are. It does everything for us, so it's good to learn a little bit more about how it works.
Absolutely. And so often it, it can be the situation that actually the best person to heal someone is themselves. And so for someone to sit down and be taking the time to actually listen to their brain, and see what's coming up for them, and then actually to be going on to practice the other elements of this intervention, to actually to actually take patient responsibility for their healing journey, I think is incredibly inspiring and exciting. Um, so just wow.
Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing sometimes, this one woman I remember that we worked with, she said to me, she had a really traumatic life, and she was one of the women who had been homeless and just like lots of trauma and issues in her life. And she said to me one time, she said, I never thought about a thought before.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I
Gosh.
was like, wow, that's like, she said, yeah, I never thought about a thought. I just I just do things.
Yeah.
I never realized that I have a thought. And then before I have an action, I can stop it. Maybe I can stop what I'm going to do. Maybe I think she had some addiction issues. She's like, so I could actually stop between the thought of like, I need to get high and going and getting the drugs. She could make her, she could change her mind. She could stop that behavior.
Incredible, isn't it? Actually, just
Yeah.
literally training the brain to pause and to have a moment of
Mm-hmm.
thinking about something before you act on it. And then for a lifestyle like that, where it was must have been just so that, this is happening, that's happening. There's no time,
Yeah.
there's no contemplation, there's no opportunity for evaluation. That's just what a life skill to take on.
Yeah. I mean, if you think, and people sometimes don't appreciate, like it takes time for the brain to process all this information. It seems like it's instantaneous, right? It feels like I had a thought and I don't know, it could be something like I move my hand, like I just move my hand now in front of the screen, right? That thought went somewhere in my brain to make me make that movement. So it seems instantaneous, me moving my hands, but it takes milliseconds, tens, maybe 100 or so milliseconds to make that thought, change that thought into a response, a behavior. And so I think part of learning about the brain and how it works, and even to some extent learning through meditation, is there is time. There's a little space between the thought and the action. Even if it's like something you're going to say, like say in your head, you get really mad and you want to lash out at somebody. There's a little space of time where you can change your mind about that and not say it.
Absolutely. And the
Yeah.
the the relationships that you have with the people surrounding you could just change hugely if you could take that on and part of your life.
Yeah. Just give it a little time, slow down a little bit. Like everyone is always in such a hurry.
Yes,
And, slow down a little bit and kind of like, yeah, reflect on what you're going to do.
makes sense. And is there anything else that you would like to share with the listeners today about what you do or what they should be thinking about doing?
Well, I guess, my biggest message I kind of mentioned at the beginning is to prepare yourself for the future. Our program, Map Train My Brain, I usually call it a brain fitness program. It is also an intervention. You can use it obviously after something has happened, but I think it's important to kind of reevaluate how we think about our own brain and keeping it healthy. You know, exercise it, not only literally like through aerobic exercise, but exercise it mentally. Meet new people, go to new places, kind of force yourself to expose yourself to novelty, to new things. And yeah, because you have to kind of keep it healthy. You have to keep it working, keep it functioning for the future. And our program works for that, but there's other ways to do it. And I think everyone has to kind of find their own place, their own set of skills that work for them.
Mm,
But it has to be something substantial. I think the other thing I would say is like, yeah, it's easy to kind of, or it's wishful thinking to think, well, if I don't know, jump in a tub of ice cubes or something, that's gonna cure me. It's fine. You can do that. But I mean, things that are work take work,
yeah.
basically. Things that really, really work take some effort.
Yes. And
Yeah.
especially when it comes to the mind, actually, this idea of it being a bit like your body, you're not going to lose weight or gain muscle unless you put it under some stress or strain or new activity. And one of the things that I'm quite passionate about fasting is that you can't fast the same amount of time each day of the week because the body gets used to it and goes, oh, I know what you're doing. No,
Mm-hmm.
weight loss or whatever. So actually, you need to be changing things and mixing it up to challenge the brain. And so no, it's really interesting, that idea of actually making effort in whatever you're taking on and you're using in those.
Yeah, I mean, the studies that I did years ago in my lab, those were those actually were two of the features that really helped, even in this process, it's neurogenesis, making these new neurons. was novelty, like learning something new, and effort. As long as it was kind of new, it was new learning, and it required effort, pretty effective in changing the brain.
Novelty and effort.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good combination.
That's brilliant. And so people can find you online at your website.
Mhm.
Would you like to share that with the listeners?
Yeah, I would. So it's maptrainmybrain at .com. That's the website. If you want to contact me directly, I have maptrainmybrain at gmail.com. And yeah, I have a 6-week online course video, just me leading the class. So if you're interested in that, it's $99. It's kind of would be good. You could do it at home by yourself if you wanted to, and or with a group. It doesn't really matter. And then on the website, I talk a little bit also about how to do the program if you just want to do it, on your own.
Fantastic.
And then obviously my book is you can find that anywhere pretty much.
Brilliant.
I think it's even, I don't know if it's in Portugal. I know it's in a bunch of different languages now, though.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely super. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been fascinating. And I look forward to sharing your links and your course online. And hopefully we can catch up later in the year or whenever you might bring out your new dance program, because that sounded super exciting. People dancing themselves into health. Wonderful.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I'm also really a big fan of your work too.
Many thanks. Thank you so much.